least half Navajo.
Oh, okay. Great. One of our counselors, Mark Clark, has left the council for a little while to get more involved with his tribal government. I can't remember which one. Was he down in Arizona?
Oh,
No
really?
idea.
Because I'm
Yeah.
from the Four Corners.
Okay, it might be very similar. You'd have to ask, you'll see him at the actual budget committee meeting.
Oh, really?
Ask him about that. Yeah. Well, he's also on council. So if you, as you kind of move through the process, for council appointment, he will be one of the people that's asking questions.
So exciting.
Okay, so I'm supposed to, I've muted the YouTube. And now we're being live streamed. All right. Charlotte responded and said that this meeting worked for her, but I'm not sure if she's going to come in.
Think so, just because she's kind of been late.
Yeah. So we'll give it, maybe give it a few more minutes to see if they come on. I did talk to DeAndre when we had to cancel the meeting and let him know we were going to reschedule. And he said just to send it to him, but I haven't heard from him since. So he may or may not be, he had seen the email and had gotten it, but I'm not sure whether or not he didn't RSVP. So it might not be a packed house.
Yeah, I thought I was gonna be late.
Well, you were the last one here so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah, got momentarily delayed.
Traffic out there, it rained and
Yeah. I
nobody
know.
knows how to
It took
drive.
my 2-minute commute, I lived 2 minutes.
Were you safe?
Oh, yeah. Right, actually quicker. Not weather-wise.
I'm gonna start sharing and see if pull it up this way and see. And I did check, we don't elect a new budget committee chair and vice chair until the April meeting.
Right.
So we don't have to do that tonight.
Yeah, it's just the information, right?
Just informational, yeah.
At this point, we wouldn't have a quorum.
Well, we're not gonna be making any decisions tonight. We told council that this was just an informational meeting. If,
They took advantage of it.
yeah, it's like, all right, now that we've told council, we're not making decisions, we'll bring you all the things we start bringing decision packages now. Well, I suggested that to Greg and he said, we should probably just stick with the budget committee meeting. So, why don't we go ahead and start the recording? Hopefully, I'm checking my work email to see if I got any issues with anyone getting on and logging into the meeting. Our secret meeting room.
Oh, the
Hey,
secret
right?
room? Yeah, it is, yeah.
Well, congratulations. That's cool.
All right, well,
Bit humbling, but it's
we will go ahead and get started and hope that Charlotte can join us and anyone else online. So, I am screen sharing. Good. Okay. So,
still strobing over here.
still getting some.
It's really weird on the.
I haven't strobed for a while, but these keep flat.
Sitting here. Like you guys should be.
Yeah, it just flashes on, and flashes off. Still flashing though.
Huh?
I have no signal.
Yeah. I've been wondering if you. Cables between the dais, so the sections got.
You use that quite a bit sometimes. Boogered up and really boogered up.
See.
There a way to restart this section? Is
Do.
That one's on?
That way you guys can, we'll have the microphones, you can see the presentation.
okay.
I would try and fix this, but it takes a little effort to get into the cabling that's built into here.
Is yours on?
Yeah, and these are, you just have to get about this far away. We're not gonna have any problem hearing us here, but for the live stream, you have to be kind of within, they said like a beach ball size area up there, so. We are gonna be going over a couple of things tonight. Primarily the 5-year projection and the supplemental budget, so. The 5-year forecast is something that we share with council at their annual strategic retreat. This year, that was on February 11th. And so it kind of forms the basis for, we kind of tell council how much money is available for kind of this year and the next year, and kind of give them some things that might be changing over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. And it really is the starting point for the budget process. So last year, council suggested that we bring the budget committee in to kind of have an opportunity to offer comment and get the information that they get, so that when we show up at the budget committee meeting, everyone's kind of on the same page and has had the same access to the information. So this is kind of the official kickoff to our budget season, which should hopefully be this meeting and the budget committee meeting, which will be on April 19th. And I'll send out a reminder on that date. And we were commenting before the meeting that we built this before Dilbert was taken out of the Oregonian, so we left it in the presentation. I'll find other funny comments that are finance related for future presentations. So start off, we always kind of do an overview of the economic outlook. Some of our resources are economically dependent, some aren't. So property taxes generally don't depend on how the economy is doing. Building revenues don't depend on that. State gas tax in general doesn't vary much. Liquor and cigarette taxes typically go up when the economy's down as people drink and smoke more. As economic times are harder, the vice taxes tend to go up. But there are some that go down with economic activity. So we do monitor it. Our business income tax, which is some revenue that we get from Multnomah County, is very heavily dependent, and depending on the year, it's either the second or third largest source of revenue for the general fund. So it's about $400,000 in the current year. So it's quite a bit of money, enough to almost fund either fire or police. So this is what our business income tax experience has been since 2014. It's been fairly stable and has actually increased quite a bit. There's a little bit of a downturn in the pandemic, but because of the structure of the business income tax within Multnomah County exempts a lot of small business. The exemption, I think you have to have gross revenues of over $100,000 to actually pay the tax. And the lion's share of that tax is paid by very large companies in terms of dollars. And so what we've kind of communicated to council is in 2020 in the COVID-19 pandemic, the economy overall was hurting, but that was primarily small businesses that were hurting. Large businesses actually did fairly well. And so this revenue source just kind of mirrors that. Multnomah County comes out with a forecast every year because they collect the business income tax countywide, and they are anticipating that even with a likely recession or slowing down of the economy predicted in this next fiscal year, they're thinking that that's going to flatten rather than go down at all. So that's one of the assumptions we built in the budget, is the revenues are going to kind of be flat for the next year or two rather than show a big decline. This is just kind of showing our unemployment rate. Generally, that's a good indicator of how things are going. We've been at historical lows in unemployment for Oregon, but that started ticking up over the last few months. So something to watch. And even though employment still hasn't quite recovered from the pandemic, you've seen a lot of inflation in wages and salaries. Inflation will be a topic that we're going to hit on next. I think as you guys know, inflation and inflation pressures for governments tend to lag about 1 to 2 years behind when it actually hits, because of our union contracts, how we do our cost of living. Even the materials and services tend to be a little slower for government services to kind of keep up with what the headline is. So we haven't felt a lot of inflationary pressures, but we will begin over the next few years. The good news is it seems like the inflationary pressures are kind of not necessarily going down, but kind of have stopped rising like they were over the last 12 to 18 months. So in past 5-year forecasts, we've built in assumptions around about 2.5% is our long-term assumption. Last year we bumped it up. This year we bumped it up again. So kind of what we're going to show you for fund balances and all of our personnel services is based off of the idea that inflation is going to kind of be in the 5% range next year and kind of come down to like the 4 or 3% as the Federal Reserve tries to put the brakes on inflation through their market operations. Obviously, I didn't come up with these numbers. I went and borrowed them from, they do a survey of economists and say, what's your best guess for the 1, 3, and 5 year inflationary outlook? I just took whatever the latest quarterly was and built that in. So it could be higher, it could be low, longer, but one of the things that we'll highlight just for the city is that prolonged inflation, in the 6 to 7% range would significantly impact our operating margin. And so in all of the I'll get to that in just a bit. I'm going to skip the next slide. One of the things that does also impact our revenues is state shared revenues. State shared revenues are the fourth largest source of revenue for the city general fund. And those are cigarette, liquor, marijuana, gas. And those are distributed by the state based on population. Population also affects us because of more people generally means more utility usage. So as you can see, for a number of years, Wood Village's population was very, very flat, and we had a huge spike in population with the completion of Riverwood South. And then with the Byway project, we went from about 3,900 people to almost 4,500 in the space of 4 years, which is huge growth. It took us from below the state average growth to well above it. But what we are forecasting and kind of building in is that we're not anticipating that that's going to continue. We don't have any development projects that are in the pipeline. There might be some 80 accessory dwelling units, maybe some houses that go from single to duplex. But as of right now, generally building permits have to be at least inquired upon 12 months before you actually should see anything for residential. And for large, like with the Byway, we knew about that project. Even if we hadn't been involved in that project, it would have been 2.5 to 3 years lead time between when they first approached us about getting an estimate for cost to when they actually finish. So right now, we don't have anything like that in the pipeline. Now that could change, but we're building our forecast for revenues based off of the fact that we're going to have very minimal development over the next 3 to 5 years. We built into kind of our revenue model a recession, small recession anticipated towards the end of this calendar year. We don't see a lot of impact. If we're going to have some impact from that, it'll probably start showing up in summer of next year. We'll start seeing our revenues, our business income tax revenues going down then. So for a good example, in COVID, when the state, we looked at our state gas tax, people stopped driving in April. We didn't actually see that show up in our gas tax receipts for 4 months, just because there's a lag between the collection processing at the state and when it actually comes to us. So there is even on something as immediate as that, it took 3 or 4 months for us to actually see it with the checks that were coming in the door. We are anticipating high inflation this year. We built in the last 2 years at 7.5% and 6.4%, which is what the CPI was. So those are already incorporated as kind of where we're starting from. And so it's high in the very near term, but we do see it kind of moderating and put that assumption in. This is something that I like to, again, the 5 years kind of a big picture look at the city finances. And so I just went and pulled the budget from 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, because if there are any big significant issues, a lot of times that requires us to really look at what our revenue sources are. And so as you can see, in 1960, property taxes were a good over half of our revenue. But by the time you got to 1980, they were a very small part of it. And since then, they've grown back to being kind of our primary revenue source. You can see how franchise fees, the gray ones, at one point they were almost a quarter of what we brought in, but since then they've declined. I always like to point this out. Liquor revenue used to be quite a bit more money than our property taxes. Now it's a couple, I think for our current budget, liquor revenue is in here. State shared revenue is 8%. So it's shrunk. That has flipped on its head. When I went back to the first budget, a lot of the funding for city operations came from renting out City Hall. It was actually one of the largest revenue sources that we had. All of that to say that the mix of kind of where the city gets its revenue has changed pretty significantly over the long term. And if you look at any one year in particular, there's not a lot of change in between years, not a lot of radical change year to year, but over a longer time frame, you can make some big shifts in what your revenues look like. So I always like to point that out as you get the budget, you're just getting a year over year slice, and that can mask some longer term big trends that are happening within local government finance. Here's kind of the growth assumptions. We have a couple small commercial properties that we think will come on the tax rolls with some tenant improvements and also utilities. And then some marginal increases in, like I said, redevelopment, but really compared to the last few years when this looked like 180 units coming on in one year, 50 units coming on, this is very minimal. And again, that allows us to be fairly conservative in what we're forecasting. I will just say that for a lot of our major costs in the general fund, our fire services contract is capped out at 4.5%. Police has historically, they've just passed on a 3% increase, and those are two of our biggest expenses in the general fund, as well as the 911 costs are kind of forecasted based off of what the city of Portland is proposing to increase those on. Sure. I think that expires in 2025. So we did have, I want to say September or October of 2022, there was a joint 3 cities council meeting, which was Fairview, Troutdale, and us, that we met here and talked about some ideas around fire service, because Gresham had started, I think back in 2020, it's pulled together a safer council to look at the idea of, fire service and also explore the idea of what would a fire district look like. They've since put that effort on hold, but there was about 18 months worth of meetings and data that kind of all 4 cities participated in. They put that on hold so that they could go out for operating levy in May of this year. We're not sure how that's going to go. That ends up passing, it's probably less of an issue, but they have been communicating to us over the last few years that they feel like the 3 cities are underpaying on the fire contract. And so it's likely that when that comes up, they're going to want a larger increase, a large one-time increase in what we've been paying. So, but that is up in 2025. So those conversations have been happening and will continue to happen. One of the things that we've let council know that we're doing some property tax modeling in anticipation of that. And Greg's also working with a group of graduate students to do some updates on a 2012 kind of fire service study that the 3 cities put together the last time the contract was coming out open. I think when they did that in 2012, 2013. And the last contract was, the 10-year contract was signed in 2015. So we're doing some work to update and be able to talk about calls for service demand and all of that, kind of anticipating that over the next 2 years, those conversations with Gresham about, do we do a fire district? Do we do some other model, are going to start to develop? And that really is, fire is, I want to say, a quarter of our costs in the general fund. Police and fire are good. Police are easily over half of what we do in the general fund. And it's one of our primary functions. One thing, and we can talk a lot more about property tax in City Hall after dark. It's a little presentation I put on after 6. If the council meetings go short, we get to talk about fun topics in government, local government finance. I just want to point out that with the property tax restrictions that were passed in the mid-90s, early and mid-90s, an ongoing problem that we are experiencing, that all cities are experiencing, is property taxes are capped for growth at 3%. If inflation's 7%, we still get 3%. And new properties coming on continue to pay less and less of their real market value. And so what that means practically for the finances of the city is, back before those changes, property tax receipts covered all of our public safety costs and more. Now they don't. And they every year, so this is a ratio of property taxes to public safety costs. Every year that ratio goes down a little bit. Every year we lose a little bit more, which means we have to pull from other general fund resources in order to cover the cost of public safety. And public safety costs, I haven't done it here, but when we looked at Gresham's over a long time span, public safety costs, when you look at inflation and population growth, are pretty much in line. There's not been a huge expansion in the level of service of police and fire services. It's actually gone the opposite way. I think Gresham and Portland both have done statistics that they have less police officers now than they did 20 years ago, even when the population was lower. And they have the same problem of, we have less officers on the street per person now than we did 20 years ago. And property taxes haven't kept up with even that, like, shrinkage in service level. That's just kind of the reality. And it's kind of the long-term reality of our general fund is, we know that there has to be some sort of fix for that at some point, because I don't know how low this ratio can go before things start to not function. We're in a big laboratory test with all of the cities in Oregon to see which one breaks first when it comes to public safety. There's and that's why I say fortunately for us, I think Gresham's ratio, when I calculated it, was below 50%. Portland revenue is not their only issue, but I think that a lot of the things that people see on the streets and kind of with local government services not meeting needs kind of goes back to this. And a long-term problem that's a long time coming. And the way we talk about it is, every year we dig the hole a little bit deeper. You might not notice from year to year, but at some point you look around and you realize you're in a hole. This is how we forecast our property tax. We assume there's about a 2.5% growth because we have an urban renewal agency that captures some of the property tax growth within our jurisdiction. And we don't get all of the 3% because that's calculated property by property. But every year we kind of take a look at what the prior years was, add a factor for assessed value growth, and then add new properties online. So that's kind of how we go about it. And we keep kind of track this over time to see kind of what our trends are in property tax collection. I want to pause here because we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. Do you have any questions so far? Okay. So this is a big change from our that you'll see in our budget. And I wanted to put this in. We didn't discuss this too much with council at the retreat because we had already talked to him about it, but I wanted to include it in here because you will see some pretty big changes in how we do personnel. So these are all of our positions within the city. What we did is this July, we had a staff person leave in May of last year who did all of the things: community events, community outreach, human resources, website, anything else we could throw in her bucket, we threw in there. And so we tried to hire for that position, knowing that we weren't going to find someone with the skill set for that specific need. And so what Greg took to council and proposed was doing a reorganization where we took a couple of internal positions, we created a new position, downgraded a position, and upgraded two positions. So we kind of went through the function of swapping job duties around, trying to see if we could get more out of our internal team. There was some, because we felt that there was some capacity for people who we already had on staff to do more. Obviously, we pay them more if we're asking them to do more, but we did that. That also was an opportunity. So what we do is these are our functions, general fund admin, general fund events, public safety, parks, general fund public works, general fund building services, streets, urban renewal, water and sewer. And so we had an allocation of how we kind of allocated our payroll to each of those different functions. That hadn't changed in, I think, 8 years because our organization really hadn't changed too much in that 8 years. With the reorg, we took the time to do two things. Basically, we went back through position by position and did a kind of a big picture look of, okay, here's what the allocations have been. Does that match up with what the work has been for that position? We also had to use the new, so we created an office specialist too. We had to come up with what those job duties were and kind of which fund should pay for those functions. So that was the big thing, was kind of a big picture, sit down. What's everyone actually doing in their job? Has it changed? Do we need to move some things around? The other thing that we did is with the change that we made to the budget last year, we were trying to really talk about things in terms of function. And we had a couple categories in the general fund that were general fund admin and general fund public works admin that were just kind of catch-all. So we eliminated those. We basically said, instead of just kind of putting them in this general administration, we need to actually allocate those out. And a big part of that was, a big part of public works admin for general fund was building services. And a big part of general fund admin was the time that gets spent on public safety. We actually didn't allocate any personnel to public safety because at the time it was all just general fund. You're paying for it one way or the other. We weren't really talking about our budget in terms of what are we doing. It's what pot of money is it from? And so part of updating the budget was we need to talk more about function rather than the money, the type of money that you're spending. So all of this kind of just shows, here's what our prior year totals were. Here's what the new allocation was, and you can kind of see what the change is. So, a lot of the general fund admin shifted over to general fund public safety. The public works shifted over to building services a little bit. Urban renewal saw an increase, mostly because when this was done 8 years ago, urban renewal wasn't doing a lot because it didn't have any money. Now we're actually have been spending time working on the byways, working on street crossings, the errata road fence. There's been a lot more staff time that was needed for urban renewal than there was 8 years ago. So I wanted to pause here because this is going to be, you'll see this change kind of cascade through all of the budget detail because we moved where people's were being paid out of. So I wanted to see if you guys had any questions, concerns. If you wanted, I can go into all of the detail, more of the detail. We can stare at a
Next
big
time I might.
So, but we wanted to be very clear, like this was driven by the reorganization and a sit down and look to try and make sure that we're really doing a good job of capturing what people are doing and paying them out of the appropriate function.
Sounds like you guys were really thorough in it and how you did that.
We tried to be. It was mostly Lindsay's fault.
And that's a lot of work. So good job.
One of the other things that we talk about long-term, because it comes up, is the cost of PERS. Council 2 years ago, there's a state program that would match 25% of any contribution to kind of pay down future PERS liability. We took advantage of that. We invested $300,000 in the city's money. The state matched $75,000. And the reason why, and we also funded another $300,000 this year. The reason why is No, it's not in this slide deck. PERS has a forecasting tool for kind of what they think they're going to collect from you. So that you can see, like right now, they're expecting that we're going to end up paying them about $300,000. In 10 years, that not quite doubles, but increases. And this is something that they use based on all of the pool of retirees when they think people are going to retire, what their benefits are going to be. There's basically a hump coming where the last of the baby boomers and the people who were in tier 1, tier 2 PERS before that program got changed in 2003 are kind of moving through the system. And so kind of what we've told council is that rather in council, and we've benefited from having larger fund balances. So what we've talked to council about is if we take some of that money and use it to pay down our future liability, that actually results in a net savings, because if it sits in our bank account, we only get to earn what the bank account pays, which historically has been under 1% or 2%. If we give it to PERS function is to take that money and invest it in all of the things they invested in: private equity, real estate, stocks, bonds, and generally their return over a long period, we looked at 10, 15, 20, 25 years, has been between 8 and 10%. So basically we said, do you want the money sitting in a bank account? And we can't take the money that's in our bank account and invest that and make a higher return, because we would get in trouble with the state if we did that. They call that arbitrage, when you take public funds and invest them in private equities in order to earn a higher return. So we're limited in what we can do, but if we give the money to PERS to pay down our liability, then they will invest that money on our behalf and credit the returns back to us. So this is kind of what that looks like. The $300,000 that we'll deposit ends up basically reducing the amount of money that they say they're going to need from us in over 20 years. That's kind of how the return comes back to the agency. So what we're really trying to do is flatten this hump a little bit. And so every 2 years, they go through and give us an update of based on our workforce, retiree force, updated actuarial projections, and investment returns to kind of forecast what this is going to look like. But every month we also get a credit back on the money we've invested. And so what we're trying to do internally is look at trying to manage this, because we don't necessarily get to go out and collect more property taxes if they increase our PERS bill. We have to find a way to do that. And so investing the money now allows us to kind of smooth out operations over a long period of time, which council said we want to maintain a level of service that's sustainable. And this is one of the things that we don't have a lot of control over. And this is kind of how we can positively have some control and be able to make some wise financial decisions in the long term. So general fund outcomes. The way that we structure the 5-year is we really talk about our operating funds and what our operating margin is. There's one-time revenues, there's one-time projects, there's grants, there's all kinds of things there's fund balances, there's transfers. You know, when you get into the budget, you'll see all these different categories. But to really kind of break it down over a long period, we get revenue that comes in every year and things that we have to pay for every year. And anything that we want to do has to come out. Anything that we want to do that's not just keeping the doors open and the windows closed has to come out of the margin that we have between our revenues and our expenditures. So the way we present it is to kind of show what our total operating revenues, the things that we can count on every year, and our operating expenditures, the things we have to pay for, you know, lights, utilities, personnel, benefits, all the things that if we want to continue to have the same size staff to provide the same size service, what that looks like. And so we do some projections, kind of what that growth looks like, and we come up with an operating margin. So our operating margin is forecast to be about 150,000 this next year with that kind of going down. And again, that goes down because of that imbalance between property taxes and public safety primarily. It's going down slowly, but if we rewind this back past 2018-19, it has been going down. When you strip out all the one-time and the economic ups and downs, it has been over a long-term trend going down. Now, this assumes that we spend all of kind of all those assumptions. Generally, we tend to do a little bit better because we tend to underspend a little bit and over collect a little bit in revenue. But that doesn't change what the long-term trend is for the fund. That's kind of what the purpose of 5 years is to talk about the long term. As I stated, anything that's capital or one time is not built into our forecast because every year we ask the budget committee and the council are the ones that make those decisions. Council could say, we don't have the capacity this year to spend money on capital. We want to withhold that, or we want to save up for another. We want to save up for a larger project. So this fund projection assumes that we don't do any capital or do any of the things that are presented to you in the budget in terms of adding additional services aren't done. So that's kind of the baseline for all of the funds, but especially the general fund, because there hasn't been a year where we haven't spent one-time money, but this just kind of shows that we do have a increasing fund balance and a positive operating margin over the 5 years. Again, what's in this presentation and in the staff report that you were sent doesn't contain any capital. Generally, we're in good condition. There's some cities around you'll see in the news that are having to make cuts. We're not in that position. A lot of times people make cuts because they've expanded services beyond kind of what their operating margin can sustain in the long run. And council's provided direction that is not something that we are interested in doing. They want to make sure that any expansion in service can be paid for, not just now, but in the future, so that there's not a interruption to that. This is where I kind of detailed out what those returns from PERS were. I just moved this slide later than I should have. But that's, you can see kind of what the average investment returns were for doing PERS rather than letting it sit in our bank account. And that does impact every fund. Every fund that pays personnel gets some of that savings. This is a street fund. This is our second operating fund. When we talk about the operating budget, about half of our operating budget's general fund, the other half's utilities. So this is the smallest utility. It's funded primarily out of state gas tax and our street utility fee that we collect every month on the utility bills. Because state gas tax continues to go down, this fund also has an operating margin that looks like it's kind of declining. But it is still positive. And the reason why you see a dip here in 2034 or 2023, 2024 is in 5 years ago, the council authorized a loan for the Cedar Lane project that the street fund had to pay back around $67,000. This is the last year that they have that $67,000 payment. And then they don't have to pay it anymore because the loan's been paid back. And that's why you see the operating margin decline to negative and then jump back up. This was the last year that payment has to come out of their operating revenue. Generally, we have enough money to maintain the streets, catch basin cleaning, street sweeping, cleaning of storm lines, and enough money to keep up on our pavement project. We do about $125,000 a year to resurface the city streets that aren't owned by the county. This is what the projected fund balance is. You can see here where we saved up for the big Cedar Lane project and then spent the money, and it's more than that in terms of a loan. And it kind of flattened out over 5 years, and then it should start to tick up a little bit as we get a little bit more operating margin when the loan gets paid back. So water and sewer are funded by user fees. They're both about $1 million a year in operating and revenue and expenditures. Again, this is all council has us increase utility rates by whatever the CPI is. That's been the practice going back 20 or 25 years. We are looking, we do, as part of our master planning effort, we are looking at a utility rate study, which is, we brought in a consultant to kind of, when the master plan comes up with the capital plan, we're going to actually look at what our projected expenditures and when those are going to happen. So kind of when we need to, when, rather than just increasing by inflation, we wanted to say, what are our actual cost increases and what are our actual capital? And so we can kind of better manage to make sure that we're not over or undercharging. The other thing that we know, and we've talked to council about a number of occasions, is the water fund's very healthy, the sewer fund's not. And probably we need to move some of the utilities from the water charges to the sewer charges. Kind of a shift of where the money's going based on where it's needed. But we want to finish the master plan efforts before we make that. That's been the sense and kind of public works staff and finance staff, but we want to proof of concept that by actually doing the master plans, the utility rate study. One of the things that this incorporates is you'll see here kind of what the user charges and 12-month averaging has been for water. You can also kind of see, kind of like with population, it's not quite as dramatic as population, but you can see kind of when Riverwood started to come on and then when Byway finished, kind of that uptick. Last year, we didn't really have enough. This was going up, but you can see here, it always goes up in the summer. So we weren't sure if we had a really hot summer and that was why we were seeing the increase, or if that was actually going to be kind of the Byway coming online that was going to move through the season, because water is very seasonal in terms of you have a really wet or dry summer can pretty drastically affect your revenue. But now that we've Byway's been on the books and been using water for close to 2 years, we felt confident in building an increased baseline assumption into the water revenue and sewer revenue. So you'll kind of see that in a comparison from last year. Water, even with some pretty significant capital outlay, has a net operating budget that's positive and not declining, which is great. That's what we would like to see for all of our funds. And the fund balance, even with, again, I think we put in $175,000 a year for capital projects in water, which we don't have identified. Even with that, fund balance is continuing to go up. So healthy level of reinvestment and operating margin in excess of that. Sewer fund's a little different. Sewer, we have a little more cost pressure because we pay the city of Gresham for our treatment of our sewage. And they adopted a rate increase for the next 4 years that was 7%, 7%, 7%, and 14%. And so we don't have any control over those costs. Those are what we have to pay. And so that, and we know that we've historically had more of a need in sewer and the revenues haven't always been there. Kind of between those two factors, this isn't as unhealthy of a spot as water is, which is why we've talked to the council about making that shift. So for 2 years, council actually took all of our proposed rate increase for the year and gave water 0 and gave the rest to sewer, kind of try and do some short-term shoring up of our sewer fund. But in general, this graph for the sewer fund used to kind of drop off towards the end. It's now actually mostly flat. There's 2 years here, I think these 2 years where we had the additional rate increases, that coupled with the fact that sewer has less volatility in its user charges. You can see here how the sewer charges have kind of hit. This was as Riverwood and the Byway were kind of coming online. So pretty significant uptick. We were doing about $90,000 a month. In 3 years, that jumped to 110,000, which is faster than, which is good. It was faster than we had anticipated. So overall, general good news for both of our utilities. But we aren't forecasting any additional people coming online. That's just the people that have moved in and the usage that's been going on based on the development that's already completed. The last part I'll touch on, urban renewal is a component unit of our government, but has its own separate board, but we also manage the funds. And it does affect, we gave a presentation 2 weeks ago, I think, 1 week. Weeks get long in budget season.
Yeah, I understand that.
This is kind of the projection for urban renewal. We updated the board on this. We had the byway project when it came on, didn't come on at the evaluation that we thought it was because of a 1-year correction that the assessor's office made. And so which was disappointing, but really just kind of limits the urban renewal agency for the next 3 to 5 years as we pay back the bonds. And the bonds, we took out the bonds in 2020 so that we could pay for the construction of this building. There was $1.6 million for this. There was about $800,000 of incentives and utility relocations that was our contribution to the byway project. The rata fence was about $400,000, and then the work that's been doing on Halsey for the enhanced street crossing and pedestrian safety is going to end up being about $500,000. So we sold about $3 million of bonds, and we got those 4 projects kind of done, and that was going to be our big push for kind of a 3 to 5 year window, is to get all those priority projects that were identified done. So in summary, we're in pretty good shape compared to some other municipalities. We still have some long-term concerns, which staff's working on, trying to come up with ways of addressing. But at least for the next year or two, absent pandemic or other disaster, we're in pretty good shape. So that's where when you see the budget come, you'll kind of see that we have some additional capacity. You'll see some projects that council has indicated to staff based on our strategic retreat that they want to see some proposals or some action on, since we have that ability. And that's coming from, just so you guys know, it's all of this is being driven by what's sustainable, what can we afford? Let's not live beyond our means and create this service hole that we're going to dig in, that we're going to have to go back out and try and find more money because we overpromised and we didn't have the financial capacity to continue. So, and we're always kind of working to enhance our finance. The big push probably over the next few years with the water and sewer fund master plan coming on is we really want to take a look at putting away money now for future expense. That's what we've done with this building. This building was constructed based on general fund savings, urban renewal contributions, and the sale of old City Hall property. But council has us putting money away for replacement of all of the major systems in this building, so that it won't just be a nice building that eventually deteriorates and gets worse. It'll be a building that we can maintain long-term as an asset for the community. We want to get to kind of have a conversation about what other major pieces of infrastructure, like in our, our water wells, our sewer pumps, are we going to be relying on bond funding if something breaks? Are we going to try and be relying on fund balance? Or are we going to kind of look at each of our assets, kind of figure out what their useful life is and start putting money away now so that we don't end up in a position where things are breaking, we don't have any money, and we need to go out and beg for a loan.
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of governments that operate that way. Council has directed that that's not how they want us to operate. So we're going to try and find what makes sense to do sinking funds for, and what's going to make sense to kind of just build into our operating capital. And just as kind of a spoiler, one of the big projects that we know is coming is the replacement of the sewer trunk line from 240th all the way into Fairview. It's the main sewer collector that ends up sending all of the sewage down to the wastewater treatment plant that Gresham has along Sandy Boulevard. That's going to be a major project. It's going to be preliminarily $3.5 to $4 million. We are exploring, right now sewer doesn't have any debt. We are looking at some programs through the federal, either the ARPA or there was also an infrastructure piece to that that was specifically set aside for public utilities and to make sure to update the nation's infrastructure. And so there's also some either direct grants, which are less likely unless we become really good friends with our local congressman. Or the more likely is that a lot of money and subsidization went into kind of the state clean water revolving fund and what is it? One of them's for drinking and one of them's for sewage. I can't remember what they call the funds, but where they offer basically low or no interest rates on infrastructure projects for water and sewer. So we're exploring what those might look like and going to probably bring a proposal back after the master plans have been presented for that. That is a great question. It's
Do we have a great answer?
I don't. Well,
I've been working on.
we've been working on a lot. We sent an email this week to our consultant, let them know that we have our budget committee meeting on April 19th. And we've been telling people we're going to review what's in that and the budgetary impacts. And we would really like to not have to tell people that it's not done. So in order to get it published, in order to meet the budget committee public hearing guidelines, we have to actually know what that number is 2 weeks before that. And we also need time to review the master plans and give back any comments. So we basically need a copy. We want a copy done by March 28th. I don't know if they'll get it to us. They have sent, I think they've sent over all of the wastewater, all the pieces of the wastewater plan draft. We're still waiting on the water. And so we're working with them and putting a little bit of pressure on them to make sure that we get that done so that we can get it in front of council before budget and then bring something a little more concrete than what we've had before as part of the budget meeting. So that's the update that I have. It feels like it's been 95% done since this December.
Mhm.
That's one of the frustrating things, is it? We know what it is. We just need to do the last 5% of work to actually get it done. So that was the first part of the meeting. Do you guys have any questions, comments?
Not yet.
And so, and again,
You know,
I
it's all
know,
gonna come.
I know that a lot of this is especially if you're new, it's like coming out of, like trying to catch water coming out of a fire hose. It's
Yeah.
flowing past you. And so I've sent the presentations to you. If you have any questions you'd like additional follow-up on, you can email me. And if it's more than an email, we're always available for a sit down. Provide more information on any of these topics. Some of them I really like to talk about, some of them less so, but willing and able to do anything you guys want. So the other part of kind of the other half of what we were going to cover tonight is supplemental budget. So as you guys know, city manager proposes the budget committee approves the budget, council adopts the budget. That all happens kind of between the March and June timeline every year. So we're trying to build a budget for what we think is going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months. Sometimes things happen that you don't expect. So there is a process that's provided that cities can go through to make changes to their budget if their need arises. So generally the need doesn't arise, but we do have some needs that have come up that weren't anticipated. And so we told council, and a lot of these things are things council told us that we should do. Generally, Greg or John will take something to council and say, hey, these are our options. Should we do this? Should we not do this? If council says do it, then we say, okay, well, if it's going to be a large financial impact, we actually have to do a supplemental budget. And so we are planning on doing a supplemental budget hearing on our March 28th meeting. And so council gave some feedback. And some budget committee members gave some feedback of, this is a part of this whole life cycle of the budget that up until now, council's been aware of, but we haven't really run past budget committee. And so they wanted to make sure that this is kind of informational for you guys, so you know what happens to the budget after you guys approve it. Kind of keep you informed. If you guys have any comments, suggestions, concerns about what council's approved, they want to kind of be very transparent about what we're doing. So hopefully I'll be able to get through this in about 10 or 15 minutes, but stop me if you guys have any questions on any particular project. A lot of these belong to our John's fault. I'm just going to throw him under the bus right from the get-go. I'll try and answer as much as I can, but for really detailed questions, I'll probably have to have John follow up with you directly. So just want to give that caveat. I know a little bit about a little bit. John's knows a lot about a lot for these. So what is a supplemental budget? There's a number of different categories. There's a number of different restrictions that you can have. There's some things you really can't do, even unless you have a real emergency, like things are being destroyed. We do have to have it be adopted by council and hold a public hearing. And so that's what we're going to be doing on the 28th. It's only for this fiscal year. We can't do a supplemental budget that affects future fiscal years. That has to be run through our normal budget process. And we can't come back and raise taxes as part of a supplemental budget. So these are the things, so kind of there's going to be two sections to this. There's things that we have to bring back because we don't have the wiggle room in our budget to do these things without taking legal action and adjusting the budget. And then there's going to be things that are housekeeping. These are things, sometimes what we think we're going to spend money on isn't what we actually spend money on. And so if we're not required to do that, and generally they're low dollar amounts, or they're things that we've talked about doing, we just had the timing of when we were doing them wrong. And generally we wouldn't bring that back for formal action, but since kind of the philosophy's been, if we are going to take formal action, we're also going to use that as an opportunity to kind of clean up all this other stuff and be very transparent about what the money was spent on. So the things that kind of would require or trigger a supplemental budget are our SCADA upgrade and sewer closed caption TV. So SCADA, what is that? It's supervisory control and data acquisition services. So for our water and sewer utilities, at our reservoirs, at our wells, at our pumps, at major junctions in our system, we have these monitoring devices that kind of tell us how much water we're pumping out of the ground, how much water is in the reservoir, how much water is coming out of the reservoir, how much sewage is being pumped, how much sewage are we sending down at certain points. All of that information is referred to as SCADA because that's kind of the monkier for all these flow meters, communication devices. It's a system that I think most utilities use. So we had budgeted this last year. We saw this as part of the budget process. At the time we didn't have bids, we had an estimate. We had a firm RH2 come in and basically we paid them to come in and do a complete inspection of all of the different data sections, all of the communication, the computer that controlled all of this and did all the reporting. They came back and they said, you guys have more here than we thought. We can either, and they gave us two options. We could break it into multiple phases and only spend the $90,000 that we had appropriated this year and then do like a phase 2 at future fiscal years, or we could kind of do it all at once. Over the long term, doing it all at once was going to save time and money. And so John brought this to council, the contract to council in July. Council said, let's not be short-sighted. Let's try and save money over the long term rather than try and stick to the budget that we approved. And so they authorized the city manager to sign the agreement with RH2. So that work has been going on now. We've replaced all of the communication devices to a private secure cellular network, which is good that we had that in the works because we lost some of our communication devices for SCADA for about a month, and rather than fixing the old system. We just had them fast track putting the new system in, which was work we were going to do anyway. We just needed them to do it more quickly. This project's probably going to wrap up in November of this year. So it's going to kind of span multiple years, but this is kind of the first part of it. So what's the supplemental budget asking for? It's asking to increase the contract that we have with RH2. And then we also had to buy a new SCADA controlling computer and have that integrated to our existing IT infrastructure. So that was not anticipated at the time. The server that we have, existing was basically just a souped up desktop. It was a one box. We thought we were going to keep that system. Now we're actually getting an actual server machine that fits into a server rack and needs to be cooled and has all the bells and whistles, has its own firewall, its own power backup, data backup. So that's more than what we thought we were doing. But as we move through this process, we didn't want to spend a bunch of money and end up with a system that didn't work well or wasn't secure. And so we also are having to pay our IT provider, which is Global Network Solutions, to integrate that to our current server environment and set up firewalls and communication protocols to kind of segregate that system entirely from our city computers to make sure that one of them goes down, the other one doesn't, and that they're kind of separate, the same part of the same system, but very separate, and have different controls and monitoring. So that's kind of what the budget asks that we're taking forward is. The second piece is sewer closed captioning TV scoping. This was last done 5 years ago, and we based the budget for this. And the idea here is that as part of the master plan, especially for sewer, there's going to be a lot of projects, and a lot of that's generated by them doing smoke testing, doing shutting off flows, monitoring flows after storm events or after major events, kind of doing it's all modeling. The engineers don't actually get down and look in the pipes, which is probably good because that would be a very hazardous job. But what we can do and what we were planning on doing as part of that is they're going to recommend these projects. We would like to do closed caption TV, basically send a camera. I'm not going to be real technical about it. A camera on a string down the sewer pipes to kind of look at what's in there. Because they can model and kind of do things based on inference, but this actually goes in and sees what the condition of the pipes is, sees if there's some artery clogging of the sewer arteries and where that happens, so that we can basically proof of concept what the engineers are modeling for us. And this will be helpful because any of the projects that come out of it will have a much better, we'll have kind of proofed what that's going to look like. We don't want to open up the ground and realize that the pipe has corroded entirely. We're not going to be able to sleeve it, and we are actually going to have to excavate or dig out more than we had originally anticipated once we have the ground open. This, so it's kind of gives us a better idea of operationally how to do the system, and for any of the projects that are going to be proposed, gives us a greater level of confidence in that what we think the project's going to be when we open up the ground is what it's actually going to be, which is always helpful in trying to plan these, because anytime you open up the ground and it's not what you're expecting, it gets expensive quickly. Yeah, we had that happen with our stormwater, or what we thought was in the ground and what we thought the conditions were was not the case, and that ended up leading to a lot of overruns, and mostly because you've already mobilized all your construction equipment to open up the ground and then try and figure out what you're going to do means that you're kind of idling all of that equipment and manpower. The contractors will bill you for that, because if they're standing there waiting for you to decide whether or not you want to expand the work, they can't do other work. And yes, like I said, yes, we had on our Cedar Lane project, which was replacing a large part of our storm line, some of our utilities. They did coring samples within the street to kind of figure out what it looked like and what was going to be needed to repave that. When they actually opened up the roadway it was not uniform.
Oh,
There was a
wow.
lot of variation and Wood Village, I didn't know this at the time. Wood Village has kind of springs that kind of pop up at random places and move. So there's a lot of water infiltration that doesn't always come up in the same spot.
Mhm.
And so when they opened up the street, they were waiting for it to dry out and it never dried out. And as long as you kept it capped and didn't really get under the street, you're probably fine. But once you opened it up and you tried to dig down to hit some dry ground and you kept digging and there wasn't any dry ground there. What ended up happening with that project is they had to put in 24 inches of backfill of large riprap backfill and then another 12 to 18 inches of finer gravel and sand, which was not, say they excavate almost 3.5 feet out from under the street to put a base, because otherwise the contractor wouldn't guarantee that the street wasn't going to break up in 10 years. Because like what's under here is not. So we like to call it the future Wood Village Airport because you could probably land a small plane on it and not worry about it because it was very overbuilt, but it had to be because the soil conditions under there were not great. So what ended up happening was that a $300,000 project turned into a $900,000 project in the middle of the project, which is why we have that.
Wow, oh,
Which is
okay.
why we have the loan from the street fund to the general fund is the street fund did not have enough money to,
So it makes good ideas.
Yes.
Sewer lines before we.
Mhm.
and we
I
did,
see.
and we did try and do as much as we could. Like I think John said, when we were putting that project together, you know, every 60 feet, they went and kind of took a slice out of the street and
Mhm.
looked at what was there. But there's a lot that can happen in that 60 feet. And when they opened it up, it was not what they thought it was. And so there wasn't really any way to know that because that had been installed back in the 1950s and there weren't a lot of drawings. There wasn't really it's kind of like with a house, you don't know what's behind the wall until you tear the sheetrock off.
Yeah.
And then you can get some nasty surprises. Yeah. Yeah, back then it might have been dry and they just said, you know what, we can just lay some blacktop
Yep.
on top of this and it'll be fine. Yep, it worked. So these are kind of the two big asks, and those are both water and sewers. Skate is paid 60% by water, 40% by sewer. This would be all sewer, but it's a large enough amount of money that would trigger supplemental budget because we couldn't just appropriate that from contingency. But so those are kind of the two big projects. I want to pause and see if you guys have any other questions about either of those two. Questions, comments, concerns, and if you don't have them now, you can always email Greg or I. Or we are having a public hearing on the 28th. You can always come back to City Hall and share them in person. So.
No questions yet.
We'll see if we can
Wait.
generate some. Yeah, we can see if we can generate some. So these are housekeeping items. These are things that we wouldn't necessarily need to come back to and convene a public hearing for. There's enough wiggle room within our operating contingencies that are approved every year to kind of do most of these, but we want to make sure and be transparent about everything we do. So parks, we brought an extra spring horse for the park. Splash pad water, this is big. When we built the budget, we had September of 2021 was the only month of data we had for running the splash pad out front. So we really didn't know what a full summer would be like. So we budgeted kind of based on a guess. I think we budgeted $8,000 for splash pad water. We can do 3,000 a month in June, July, August, and September. And so since we'd never done a June, July, August, September, we didn't really know. So we're going to add some money for that, which would come out of contingency. Park restrooms, then you can ignore that streets part. I don't know why I have that in there. Park restrooms, council made a decision to open up the restrooms over the winter to help with some of the issues that people who are houseless in our area were having, and also some as an extended service. The restroom was designed to be turned off for winter. It wasn't winterized. There wasn't any heating in the utilities. We put in some heating that we thought was going to fix it, but with the colder winter this year and then the prior year, we ran into kind of where our on the fly fix for heating did not work. To be honest, the facility when it was put in was not designed to be opened over the winter. It was never built for that. So pipes froze, they burst. We had to have a plumber come in and fix them. So that's $7,500. The contingency general fund has an $850,000 contingency. So there's funding available for kind of all of these. Water. I don't know if it's because we're doing a master plan or if we just had a really wonky year. We budget about $25,000 a year for odd breaks within the system. We have exceeded that by quite a bit this year. We had a gearbox at well 3 go out. This water master plan, so we have a contracted amount for the water master plan. We thought we were going to have gotten more done by June 30th than we did. We only kept $100,000 out of appropriation, but we needed 116 because we didn't spend the $16,000 in the prior year like we thought we would. So that's why that is. It's the total project cost hasn't changed from what the contracted amount was. It's just which fiscal year it fell in. We were a little off in how quickly we were going project. Water breaks. We had a water main or a main valve on Buffalo Wild Wings fail entirely on a college football weekend. So you had to bring in someone to do that on the weekend and dig up part of that parking lot. We had a blow off valve that was stuck and we needed it turned off on Holiday Place. Ash had a main break, and then the new byway service line we had to replace, even though it was a hold. They're actually in discussions with the contractor who put that in because they looks like they took 3 sections of pipe and put them together with couplers rather than just running a solid section of pipe there, and the joints failed. So John's working on pursuing some, I don't know if it's insurance or warranty claims with that, but we had to fix it because it was leaking. We couldn't wait for that process to resolve to do that. So we wanted to add that. And water fund has a contingency of about $300,000. So there's money there for these kind of unexpected breaks. And this is a lot higher than most normal years. We just kind of, I guess it was like a leap year. We were due for more breaks than normal. Streets, we brought a traffic reader. This is something that was discussed at council. Council wanted to have a better idea of traffic counts and speed. And so we'd borrowed Troutdale's previously and had some good results with it, but it's not always available. So this allows us to do more monitoring to deal with problems without having to go through that. And it was a kind of a minor cost. And then we got a bill for a traffic study. They had left on their desk for 4 months and we had already closed the books for the fiscal year. And so Lindsay scolded them repeatedly for not doing their billing on time. And, but we thought the project was all billed because we had checked with them. Every year for June 30, we tell our vendors, if you want to get paid, we need an invoice for all the work through June 30th by the end of August, or you don't get paid or out of that pot of money. We can't tell them you don't get paid at all. I kind of wish we could, but they had said we're done billing, but there was this one invoice that got lost in the mailroom on their end. So, but their project wasn't over budget, so we had just counted it as underspending the prior year. The street fund contingency is $50,000, so none of these are going to materially impact that fund. Personnel. So this is something we took to council. One of the annual performance plan items this year was to do a pay compensation study. It's something we try and do every 3 to 5 years. Council approved an increase to our pay scales, primarily because our union contract is capped out at 4%, but we had been experiencing 7.5%, 7% inflation. So we did basically a one-time correction to that to basically catch up with inflation. We were either gonna, and kind of the rationale that Greg approached council is when the union contract comes open and they're negotiation, we're gonna have to pay this. We can either pay it now or we can pay it later. And kind of what do you want us to do? So council felt that it was the right thing to do was to do a one-time pay increase and bring kind of staff up in line with what inflation had been because it had been capped out because of the union contract. So these were kind of how it affects the different service areas. The funds won't be higher than basically adding $50,000 to our personnel services budget. But council said when to do that, we told them we can probably fit this in from underspending from vacancies. But since we're doing a supplemental budget, we wanted to just go ahead and true up our personnel costs for the year. And so we said, this won't be any more than that. And there'll actually probably be, some of these areas aren't going to need the additional appropriation, but water and sewer might, because we've been at full staff for most of the year. These are multi-fund projects, so these don't belong to necessarily any one fund. We did an ops building refurbishment. We spent, I think, $27,000 last year. There were a couple lingering things that we wanted to kind of finish up: chairs, desks, and took out a doorway. Something else, I can't remember. Oh, there's a safety railing for the ops building. And so that added about $9,800. So the total project we said was going to be 30. We spent 27. It's going to end up being about 37. And so we wanted to let council and budget committee know about that. And then adding some funds for city hall maintenance. We had to have, at the time, we didn't know how often we needed to service the 17 different HVAC units that are in this building that help do the temperature control. That ends up being about $1,500 a quarter to have those. Basically, they have to come in and change out all the filters in the machines up above, and then they have to clean the big air unit on the side of the building and do some maintenance on that. Also wanted to do carpet cleaning and blow in some more bark dust since it's been about 2 years since that's been refreshed. So all of that was about $6,000. John brought up as we were kind of going through this SCADA project and talking about security, one thing was physical security. We've had the same keys for about 30 years for a lot of these facilities. And we're not confident that when employees left, they always turned in all the keys that they had. So we decided, since we're going through this kind of increasing our security for our SCADA system, putting all these controls in place, we should probably also update the physical security and rekey the locks for all these places. So there's enough money to fund that, but we wanted to kind of bring that forward and let you guys know we were doing it. The truck plow, this was my fault. We bought a new truck. It took us 18 months to get the truck. We ordered a plow and then a sander attachment. The sander attachment got delivered and we took possession of last fiscal year. I thought it was the sander and the plow, but the plow came with the truck. And so the plow didn't get delivered until this year. We always planned on buying it, but I thought we had bought it and received it last year, but we hadn't. So we need to move that appropriation up a fiscal year since we got the truck 2 weeks ago. So that's
Did
really.
you use the truck yet?
We did. It's being driven every day, but the plow got used, I think, the last part of the last snow event. It wasn't here. We actually picked it up the day after it snowed. So it wasn't here the day, that first day that when it started hitting, but we're glad that we at least got it. Because this is where we really felt that all the supply chain disruption it was an 18-month process to order and then get that truck delivered. All the backlog that had happened. Also wanted to kind of highlight that we did a website refresh to kind of make our website more user-friendly and be able to push more information out on it. And then this last one is kind of a talking about supply chain. Every year we trying to replace about a quarter of our desktops because we try and put them on a 4 to 5 year life cycle. We also replace our servers whenever they're due, they're hitting the end of their 5 to 7 year life. So we've got 2 servers that are coming up for replacement this year. We've got 4 desktops coming up for replacement. This would normally be a budget 23-24 ask. So you'd see this as part of your budget process. In talking to our IT provider, they are having a lot of difficulty with some of the components that they use. And they're having so that impacts us 2 ways. Longer lead times, and they can't this is the first year where they said, we won't give you a quote on any of this stuff. It's what the price is when we go to buy it, because there's so much variability in what those prices are, even week to week, let alone month. We can't, normally the quotes were good for like 60 days. Like you're gonna have to ask us a week beforehand. So we're asking to add it to this year's contingency so we can tell our provider, we are gonna order these, we want you to buy them. Whenever you see a good price over the next few months and like they have the parts that you need in stock, go ahead and buy them rather than waiting for them to start that process July 1st. Because I don't anticipate that we'd have a really hard time doing that. But at the same time, I didn't think that it would take 18 months to get a truck. So they've let us know that they have changed their policy on quotes, and they've let us know that they're experiencing some supply chain issues. And so this is just kind of responsive. Let's go ahead and have the appropriation now so we can enter into a contract with them so that then they can get started a little bit early. And hopefully that will save us time and money over the long run. So we'll stop here. Do you guys have any questions about the housekeeping items? Any concerns? Again, all this stuff is not something that we would necessarily need to come back to the budget committee for, but since the SCADA and the sewer CTV, but all the other little stuff that was significant enough to mention. So next steps, you guys, if you have any feedback, let me, Greg, anyone on the council know. We're going to publish we have to do a publish of all the details of what we're moving and where we're moving it in the Outlook, and we'll also publish that on our website. And then we hold a supplemental budget hearing for public comment on March 28th. That's not something the budget committee has to attend. That's something that council has to approve. Council is the one that approves that. But obviously anyone on the budget committee is welcome to participate either in person or watching online. It'll be a very quick version of this presentation with kind of a big table of all the different changes. That's all I have on that. You guys have any questions, concerns, comments?
Well, I am so excited to get started. I don't know what kind of questions that I can ask or what I should be thinking about yet, but I know that with time, it's gonna come, and excited. Just something new, and I wanted to learn budgeting on a bigger scale. And
great. And any questions that you have, and there's no bad questions. Part of the reason why we're doing this outreach more is that we got feedback from some of our budget committee members, usually people who are newer. If you've been through this process once or twice, I'm not saying we've had anyone eyes glaze over in the presentation, but it becomes less interesting the 10th time you see it, rather than and so we try, kind of the discussion was, we have to balance between giving enough detail and explanation for the new people, but not subjecting the people who've heard it to, how do I say this? I've worked for some other organizations where they would have 5 or 6 hour meetings, or they would have multiple 2 or 3 hour meetings to go over things. We try and do it in about 2.5 hours, and that's kind of what we build it around. But we know that that doesn't necessarily meet the needs of everyone. And so what we've started doing is doing kind of for new budget members, that orientation, offline questions, because it's sometimes we found the feedback we got from people was they might not necessarily be comfortable asking the question in a public setting with the council and the rest of the budget committee there, but they did have questions, and there really aren't any bad questions. A lot of times we learn something when we have to answer. You do have a big question? We do.
You do.
Are we gonna?
I have not received any that the pie chart pies have not changed. I'll be sending out orders. So
Pie chart.
I
I
don't-
mean,
I
like pie,
wasn't-
like banana cream pie or no? Just, yeah, I was thinking banana.
I was not here at the meeting, but
I
there was a lot of,
Yeah.
yes, last year.
Oh, yeah, it's my first one. Well, isn't that when I interviewed?
Yes. yeah.
Yes.
But I wasn't here at the meeting. This must have been 8 or 9 years ago.
Oh,
There's a lot of pie charts. One of the council members said, with all this pie charts are making me hungry. And they paused the meeting so that someone could go run and get pie. And so
oh,
now, rather than stopping the meeting, we provide pie at the meetings.
oh, that's cool.
So we'll be sending out a order form for,
That's great. I like banana cream pie.
I will put you down for banana cream. We'll make sure that we have one of those and that's at our April 19th meeting. So we send out kind of an ordering, and one of the staff will go to Sherry's and pick up pie. Budget committee, make sure that there's dessert available. And he has not given direction. I will be sure and flag Greg to ask him. Well, he is, I don't know if he's going to be here. I think he was planning on being gone 3 or 4 weeks, and I think he's a week and a half in. So he will be back for the budget committee.
Very technical there. Non-agenda.
Non-agenda item question, yes. I'll find out. I'll ask Greg when Greg gets back from vacation. I'll ask him when exactly comes.
Is he in Disneyland?
No, he's actually,
In-laws?
Oh, that's too
a
bad.
while ago.
Uh-huh.
and weekend.
Disneyland.
I wouldn't put it past.
I wouldn't put it past-
And that's not the reason it's not planned.
This is the current burn, because I heard something about they wanted to do some.
Oh. Oh, gotta go.
Put him to workplace down there. Yeah. Well, that's everything substantive that I wanted to cover tonight, and just kind of put a plug in that the next kind of communication will be for that April 19th budget committee meeting. But other than that, that's everything that I wanted to cover. Do you guys have anything outside the agenda that you wanted to besides?
Yes.
Okay. make sure that- We have in the past.
And generally council, this has been the most fiscally conservative council that I've worked for. Usually the problem that you have is that your elected leaders want to spend more money than they have.
Oh, okay.
That generally isn't the case. The first question that this council usually asks is, can we afford this? Not just this year, but in the future. And there's been a hesitancy in the past councils to take on any debt to finance even capital.
Oh, okay.
So they wanted to keep their balance sheet pretty clean and their debt capacity clean and not get overextended. It's very good. But at the same time, it's kind of a balance between, we're not an agency that exists to accumulate a large amount of money and sit on it, or an organization that exists to provide services. So trying to balance, there's some governments that kind of have different approaches, but we try and balance providing services with being financially sustainable, not letting ourselves either get in either one of those positions where we have taking too much money from people and not giving them service, or that we're providing service that we can't pay for in the future without a major ask. So, and one of the, like, this building is one of the, this building was built without any city debt. There's the sale of the property was about $3.5 million. General fund contributed $2.2 million from savings, or about that. And then the urban renewal paid for about 1.6 of this. So, and debt free for the city. The urban renewal has some, but no. A bond, or you pay it out, you take out a loan. We didn't take out a loan to build this. Been getting a lot more community activity, people using this, both the indoor space and the enhancements to the park that we were able to make part of that. So it's been a real kind of positives. You're not going to read about it in the newspaper or see it on news as much, but it's too positive of a story to get a lot of.
Right, let's throw in some controversy.
If your city is.
Yes, we managed to avoid, if you read the Outlook, you might not know Wood Village exists, and that's not a bad thing.
We like to be quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that just, I'm gonna bring the Children's Business Fair to Wood Village. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah,
Greg and I are gonna meet next week about possibly having that in June or July.
that'll be great.
And I have a lot of work ahead of me,
Yeah,
but
fun work.
it's gonna be very rewarding.
What's it?
The Children's Business Fair. I can send you a copy of, well, if you Google Children's Business Fair, it'll take you to Acton Children's Business Fair, and it'll have you look up the location. Just type in I put Portland, but it does say Wood Village.
Oh, great.
So, I'm working on that website. What I'm looking for is people to help. My first step was finding a location, and then I could just go from there, and I have everything that I'm crazy enough.
See a need and do what you can to meet it.
Right,
great.
and I'm excited because I'm trying to start my own business. That's mobile notary. I'm a notary, so start that. And I saw this opportunity and I'm like, well, be around like-minded people.
Yep.
So I'm gonna also, be successful to my family and other families. And
That's something that I think has been true of all of our councils. The heavy level of involvement in all the city events and helping put those on, whether it's Easter egg hunt, cleanup day, anything that they can do for the community, and not just do as in have other people do it on their behalf, but actually participate in, and staff. And I think last year, Mayor Harden was out with staff helping wash pumpkins for Pumpkin Fest and
I was
doing,
there. That's when I
Yep.
started.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
My wife mentioned that.
Right, And I am so impressed by this city that I am here today because I want to give back the way that you guys give back.
Well, one-
And I just really love the value of that.
it's a unique community in a good way.
I came right to the right city, didn't I?
And we went to-
Okay. Oh, no.
I went down and walked through the park yesterday and talking to people.